thoughts on the sport of ski racing at the moment.
Thanks, Jacques. Welcome, everybody. I really appreciate everyone joining, especially on one of the first beautiful days of the year. In a difficult year, I think we've had some really amazing speakers. I think Johnny and Jeff, world leaders, one as a men's coach and a women's coach. This presentation, it is a little bit of, well, it'll touch on strategy and culture a bit. Looking at it, I think I'm going to end up making two presentations because there are a lot of things to talk about in terms of strategy that I think will move Ontario forward. But in the short term, we've just had two world-leading coaches talk about skiing and technique, and I couldn't really pass up the opportunity to dig in a little deeper into what they said, and just compare some notes about terminology and the way they're looking at technique. And also, I will reference Johnny a bit more, not because I think he's a better coach than Jeff or anything, but he was gracious enough to let me take some of his slides and drop them right into the presentation, so we can look at some of the terms that we use and have talked about, and some of the way he's talking about it. The terminology in my presentation is largely, at least in my experience, the way Canadian World Cup coaches, national team coaches, and similar high-level coaches talk about skiing, and is often consistent with the U.S. I think, and thanks for the introduction, Jacques. I think it's worth mentioning that I think that I did like to think I had a lot of success at several levels. I was an assistant coach with the World Cup team for a while, and we had a lot of success. And I was the World Cup head coach, and full disclosure, that didn't go that great. And I think that, that was a humbling experience. And, I think there are a lot of reasons for that, why it went the way it did, but I learned a lot. But either way, you do learn a lot when you're up there with the cameras on you and that kind of pressure. Anyway, I want to start. Actually, I should probably start by sharing my screen. I want to start. Talking just a bit. I think this is slideshow. About what a provincial sport organization is, and I'll explain why I'm going here. Is there are three pillars. There's recognition, or criteria for recognition, to be recognized by the government of Ontario as an organized sport, and these are the three pillars: participation, development, and excellence. And I want to talk about that in this context a little bit, because it just speaks to the direction we're going, and in the eyes of the ministry, these are equal things, and it's important, I think, that the province is galvanized in what we're trying to do, and obviously, the reason that these are considered equal pillars is they're really integral to each other. We're going to focus a little bit more today on development and talk a little bit about excellence, and in the next stage is the next meeting, how these two things, development and excellence, will work together. But I think it's important to look at, because, even speaking with the board or deciding where we're going to focus and how we're going to spend our money, it can be easy to say, well, why are we focusing on the fewer athletes? And, this costs a lot of money. Why are we doing that? And, a healthy sport focuses on these three things, in the eyes of in Canada and in Ontario. And looking at excellence, this seems pretty benign, that athletes can pursue excellence in high performance sport. But what is high performance sport? There are metrics for it, in the OPSI, Ontario High Performance Sports Initiative, and similar to OTP. And so there's organizational metrics, there's performance metrics, which are, performance on the world stage, basically, and at key benchmark events. But our success in excellence is really measured by graduating athletes to the national ski team, Olympics, World Championships, this sort of thing. So I just wanted to frame a little bit of our broader culture and strategy discussion on that. And in a high performance plan, you need to look at like your capability audit, like where are you at relative to your goals, gap analysis, that sort of thing. So, well, this is where we're at. It's not to say that there might not be one or two more athletes that are on the team this year, but currently meeting national ski team performance criteria, we have one athlete. And I think, I don't want this to be dark news, because I think there are a lot of great things going on in Ontario, and maybe we can turn the tide, but it's important to recognize that this is where we are. And we probably have about 30% of the nation's ski racing membership, and less than 10% of the national team membership. So I throw this out there without, and I'm not going to dig into this, but what defines, like, if you had to think about it, what defines ski racing culture in Ontario? Where are we at, and who are we? And something that comes up to me is when I was a World Cup coach, my first year, we had a conditioning coach from Austria, and he, after a couple of glasses of wine one night, told us that Canadians are too nice to want to win, and that's why we need European coaches to push the athletes. And I mean, I think there was almost one less Austrian strength and conditioning coach walking the face of the earth after that, given the crowd he was speaking to. But I don't know if he ever played hockey, if he was going into the corner with Donald Brashear or Reggie Leach, if he would still feel that way. But and I mean, I don't think that defines Canadians. We tend to be polite, but we can be highly competitive. And really in Ontario, we have a lot, and I think we have the tools, we have the people, we have a lot of things going for us, and we can do this. And so I think our performance is a product of what we're doing, not who we are or what we can do. And so we need to develop strategies, and clear strategies. And in Johnny's presentation, he talked about the impact of the Attacking Viking Challenge and their conditioning program, and it is just really clear how a few key strategies can really influence and impact the direction of a sports organization. And I also want to settle on this, because the discussion today is largely going to be about technical alignment and skiing. But this is a study about successful and unsuccessful sports cultures by Joseph Baker. And HEA stands for Holistic Ecological Approach. There's more to this. These aren't the only buckets, these main ones. But I think that it's telling that successful, and this is consistently successful sport culture and organizations. So training groups, these are the groups of athletes, are inclusive with supportive relationships and even friendship, good communication. Unsuccessful sports organizations tend to individualize programs early with silos, low cohesion between the groups, and intergroup rivalry. Successful sports organizations have proximal role models with openness between elite and developing athletes and coaches, and a willingness to share knowledge and experience between elite and developing athletes and coaches. Whereas unsuccessful sports organizations tend to have boundaries between the levels. Elite athletes guard their experience. There tends to be personal rivalry, where the elite athletes see prospective and new athletes as a threat. The development model and the successful model focuses on long-term development versus early success and age-appropriate training. Less successful focuses on short-term success. Kids are seen as mini athletes. And organizational structure, the successful model is strong and coherent with clear basic assumptions and common vision. Less successful, there's a discrepancy between values and actions, certainty and there's uncertainty and confusion, lack of common vision. So I don't know, I guess you can all just think about where, whether as a provincial organization or even in your smaller community, where the groups sit. And I think we have work to do here. And even, I should say, in successful high performance plan or a model, they talk a lot about stakeholder engagement, alignment, pathway stability, clear vision, and all those things. So that will be central to our planning. And now I'm sorry, I can't see if there are questions. There we go. I'm going to talk about skiing now. So both Jeff and Johnny referred to the same thing. There are universal truths about technique and tactics. And, there might be a few things that are really individualized, but physics have not changed. Physiology has not changed. And there are different ways that different nations talk about skiing somewhat. There's a lot that's common, but really what they're describing is very, very consistent. And so it's important for us to provide a clear and consistent message to the athletes for a variety of reasons. And, one of the things I hear a lot is well, I look at it this way, or I use this term, or I talk about it this way. And of course that's okay. There are different ways of talking about it, but if there is too much of that, it's confusing for the athletes. And I know as an athlete, my ski racer, I found that when I went from coach to coach, there was a pretty dramatic difference in what I was learning and what I was being taught. And I think that that's not really uncommon in our ski coaching culture in Canada. And what happens is athletes have to adapt to us. Every time they go to a different level or a different coach, they're relearning. And I think we would do them a big favor if we try to align. So now an athlete, when they're 8 years old, is starting to learn something. And yeah, the plates will get piled and new information will come up. But if it's consistent, they will be given, 10 years to the time they're 18 to acquire some skills and master something versus adapting to us. So trying our best to be consistent with what we're teaching will help them. It gives them more time. It builds confidence. To stand at the top of Kitzbühel and start, you need to be very clear on what you're going to do and how it works and what you're working on. And it's not that different. Or Georgian Peaks for a 16-year-old or a 13-year-old. The clearer it can be for them, the simpler it will be. If they're uncertain, it'll be a little scarier, a little harder for them to do. And also, pathways and performance. Pretty much our whole, not just Ontario, but national model is built on sharing athletes, where athletes move between coaches. So starting, with U16 high performance program, they will be mostly with their club coaches, but they will, have some camps, and they might go to the nationals, and maybe their coach is there and maybe their coach isn't. They move up. There's a U19 program in the Ontario ski team. They go to NCAA. They will train with someone else in the summer because NCAA programs don't train in the summer. They could be shared between the OST and NCAA, ACA and NCAA, etc. So it's important that they are clear and that we are consistent. Fundamentals are the foundation of everything, or the basics. This is pretty clear. I'm not going to focus on this just yet, but this is not an exhaustive list or breakdown of fundamentals. But, this is the type of thing we're looking at. And these are general ski skills that become very, very important to ski racing, but they are not the key. Because ski racing technique is very specific. If anyone has seen all this before, it'll start to diversify a little bit. And if they don't create a good foundation, they will run into problems as they try to learn advanced racing technique. And it's extremely common to make a little headway with the basics, and then, that World Cup racing technique or appearance is pretty attractive. So it can be really compelling to try to jump ahead, but it is important to really get this stuff right. But ski specific, racing specific technique is more specific, and this is good for context when going back and looking at the fundamentals. So when you get to to racing, these things become important. And it's not just important to turn, it's important to turn like here, now, and generate speed and, have stability at high speeds and control, and to be able to make good decisions. So this is the foundation, the position. I'm going to move through this fairly quickly because there are a lot of slides, and there are some things I want to break down a little more. So this is very straightforward, and this position needs to be stable throughout the turn. So you'll notice Marcel here, his position, his body stays facing down the hill throughout the turn. There's a little bit of separation here as he enters the turn, but largely very stable. His hip placement, if you go through it, is the same. So there's no time that he deliberately lowers his hip. The proximity to the snow might change a little bit because of ankle flexion and angulation, but really he's trying to maximize a powerful position through the turn. Platform. Johnny talked about platform a little differently, so we'll get to that. But basically, it's edge angle flexion and position. Give you support underfoot and start to carve the skis. And the platform, I think if there was one major takeaway from this, having a strong position and platform at the start of the turn, maintaining the platform throughout the whole turn are critical. So it provides the base of support to maintain balance, control turn shape through the whole turn. Engages equipment. Now this, I don't want to get too hung up on this or confuse things, but a lot of coaches refer to wanting to be on the ball of your foot. And it was Thomas Grandy, when I started coaching him, that he actually changed my mind on this, because I always said ball of the foot. And Thomas actually argued with Dujon quite a bit about that too. So it's an interesting thing. But if you are trying to squat heavy weight and you put the weight on the balls of your feet, you know what happens. And it's the same thing in a high speed turn. So, I think in the transition, as to feel where pressure is, or when you're linking turns, to be in the ball of the foot is one thing, but to create support, you need to have power. And that drives through the heel or mid foot. And to be clear, we're not talking about rocking back. You can drive like crazy on the front of the boot and still be driving through your heel. Opening your ankle, is something else, but creating power by driving through your midfoot or heel, just like you would, in conditioning when you're jumping, landing, squatting is what creates the most power. So Johnny, these are some of the things that I thought were interesting. Johnny referred to platform basically as a neutral position before the turn starts. And, he's got a really good descriptor here where the feet are right under the racer. He's got Haugen over here, who is in a less stable position. And he talked a little bit about how with the longer skis, it was necessary to create more leverage to get the ski to carve. But with the reaction of the new skis and the force you can create in a short time, it's important to be like right over and even roll the skis from the bottom up. What, talking with coaches, what we see a lot of kids do is try to start their turn by creating a big angle. And in the absence of being able to create a platform or having that skill, they're basically putting themselves out of balance. And the most critical factor in starting the turn is having a good position and getting support under your foot right away, and maintaining that through the turn. Johnny also talked about in that, this is with Bratton and McGrath, world-class skiers, to get them to tone down the amount of edge angle they have at the start of the turn and focus more on making sure they're balanced, centered, and creating a strong platform. And so I think there's a lesson in that for those of us that are, coaching less skilled and competent athletes, that, for sure they're going to need to learn how to roll the ski on edge and carve the ski. They tend to pick that up pretty quickly because the skis, work easily. But the way I look at it is it's a bit like, learning to squat and piling a lot of weight on before your technique is proper. You might be able to lift that weight, but it's going to get ugly. And the same thing happens when trying to create too much edge angle early in the absence of good position and platform. Now this is clear, outside ski pressure through the turn. He transfers the weight to outside ski pressure. Sometimes there's talk about 60-40, and I don't know, maybe like a really skilled athlete at a high level on the flats might work with 2 feet a little more. But for the most part, even with high level athletes and coaches, I really only ever hear discussion about the outside ski, 100% commitment to the outside ski. So I will talk about generating speed. Johnny had some interesting terms. So he, again, talked about platform and then impulse. The way we seem to talk about it more, at least the coaches in my sphere, is platform is throughout the turn, but is established, when the ski begins to carve, creating support under your foot. So I thought this was interesting. He was talking about the platform in terms of a neutral position before the ski begins to carve, but he referred to it in terms of platform, impulse, or when you get energy in the ski, resisting pressure, working towards the middle, or working, he has another term for this, but working towards the middle, meaning driving forward out of the turn and releasing the ski. I actually can't see the screen, which is fine. So if anyone has a question that comes up, Jacques or Duncan, please let me know. So to generate speed, at the start of the turn, the ski is engaged. Strong platform, the ski loads and begins to carve, or we get energy in the ski. And this is what Johnny was referring to as impulse. So you can see he's created, who's that Pintero, has created a really strong platform here, right at the start of the turn. And he'll be able to push against the ski and drive the turn. This guy over here, no impulse. Not sure who that is. In the fall line, basically the position remains stable and drives forward, and you can increase force and leverage to generate speed. Increase ankle flexion to increase the turn radius or control turn radius, but basically drive down the hill to create speed in the fall line through the turn. Here, Johnny is referring to this as standing against or resisting, as you come into the fall line, driving down the hill. This is a pretty extreme example of poor platform, but still. In the apex, so this is the deepest part of the turn, the apex. Jeff talked about that, a little confusion around what apex is. In ski racing, it is the deepest part of the turn, somewhere around the gate. And this is where the most forces will be and require the most leverage. So it's really neat, and you'll start to change direction. So there really needs to be a lot of work from resisting and driving forward to try to drive forward out of the turn and resist the forces in the turn. So working against or working towards the middle is the terminology Johnny used. So this is where, he's starting to come out of the apex and driving forward to the middle or across the fall line. And I think this is a really critical thing exiting the turn. To accelerate, the racer maintains pressure on the outside ski, driving forward in the direction of travel while the ankle opens and the ski flattens out, or the skis come back under. So you can see, as he's just passing the apex, he's really driving the outside ski. There's good shin angle, ankles engaged, a little forward. The ski's coming back under him and the ankle is opening. Here, the ankle is open, where he starts to transfer the weight to the new ski, and that releases the ski. If the ankle remains fully engaged, obviously the ski is going to go, in this direction. So to try to straighten out and accelerate out of the turn, you need to drive forward. Now, obviously, or maybe it's not obvious, I would never say all this to an athlete, when we're coaching. It's usually enough to tell them that they need to drive forward and maintain ski pressure to link the turns. This is Johnny's release photo. Here's Eric Reed talking about exiting the turn.
Here's what I'm doing as I'm exiting the previous turn, pushing on the outside ski, driving it deep, releasing the angle of the ski, bringing my center of mass forward into a strong athletic position as I come onto the new ski, building that shin angle and that new pressure in a light and balanced position, and then start building the pressure again.
Snow contact. Now, I think this is really important because it seems to me like a lot of our racers, when they're younger, they learn flexion and extension, and that's really important. So they don't always know when or how to do that. And it's very common for athletes at the apex or just past the apex to like touch the ski or to it, and then things go loose. So you need to maintain outside ski pressure, forward, stay on the snow. And, you can see Marcel comes off the snow, but the goal is to stay on the snow. When athletes, unnecessarily come off the snow, the skis go loose and they're shaky. And so that's, it's kind of a scary moment. And if they will generate more speed by approaching the turn this way. They'll also have more confidence because they're in a lot more control when you have snow contact. Now, I use this slide. Approach to managing forces when releasing the ski and linking turns is individual and situational. So this is one of those places where there are some differences. First, the situational thing. The person that wrote this book that this Stromo is from, his description said that the racer is retracting their feet and extending into the turn. And, based on what Jeff and Johnny were talking about and what I've heard every coach that I know talk about is, you need to maintain power in the ski all the way into the turn. So we don't know what caused Lindsey Vonn to do what she's doing here. But I'm pretty sure she's not deliberately retracting her feet. But it will be situational. Like maybe there's terrain, maybe you get pinched, maybe you cut it off and you need to move more quickly, which is I suspect is what's happening here. And then some nations, like if you watch German men, and Costa skied this way, right at the point where weight transfers from the outside to the new ski, they don't ski in the same way that, say, Marcel or Michaela do, where they come to a strong stacked position before rolling up. It's a small part of the turn where they drive through and forward, and right when they transfer weight to the new ski, they stay a little lower and move to an extended position. But at least in my view, those are the only real variations. The goal is to stay on the snow. I'll talk a little bit about line. So the goal is always to maximize speed. So above the gate, the racer needs to create enough space to maximize the line and speed without the gate being in the way. The kids don't seem to realize the gates are obstacles. And, the goal is to carry speed by them. So that you need to clear them. So he's traveling far enough across the hill and giving himself enough space above to be able to carve the turn without it being in the way. And you'll notice that he's not even touching this gate. And, in his prime, he often would not touch the gates, which was interesting. Some racers bang on the gates a little more, but in general, if you're too close, they're too close, and they don't have enough room, there will be technical problems. It'll disrupt your position or your line. You come in too close, you'll have to back off the pressure and reapply the pressure so you don't blow through the gate. Or if your feet are in too close, you won't have enough leverage and be able to maintain a strong position, this speaks more to that. So in the deepest part of the turn, or roughly around where you're blowing by the gate, This requires the most leverage and you're producing the most force. So you need room. Body room is the space between the outside ski and the gate. At least that's the way I refer to it. And kids seem to relate to it. If you take this that Michaela's in and just back that up, what does that look like? What do you need to do? Where are you starting your turn to arrive here and be able to ski past in a strong position? And this is a little bit more of the same as what we talked about before. You know, the skiers need to maintain position exiting the turn and drive forward. If the skier comes off the ski too early, it'll cause, well, instability. We talked about that in line problems. And I mean, part of it is keeping the ski engaged, and the other part is position and forward momentum. Because, for example, we had a racer in the fall, one of the younger U19 HP guys, and he was making a big extension. Really, really good skier, but he was making a big extension somewhere around here, if you can see the cursor. So we were telling him to stay with the ski longer, which he was doing, but he was still standing up too early and opening the ankle too early, and his shoulders were going back. So even though he had pressure on the outside ski, where's my cursor? He was coming up, which released the ski and would cause him to travel down here. If you need to come across the hill, you need to keep the ski engaged. And obviously that's, you know, and Ligety was a master of this. It's a skill, you know, that requires time to learn how you release the ski and carry speed across. And you know, it becomes as important to speed as, well, maybe not quite as important, but as creating the platform and releasing the ski. Now, depth is a term you'll hear a lot. This is often confused with going straight. It is basically the distance you travel across the hill into the new turn or toward the apex. I don't have much to add here. I just thought Johnny had a great slide. So Axel is going too early, and this French racer is creating more space. So obviously he's gone too early, so he's going to need to drift. If he stepped on the ski, he would blow right through the gate. So, you know, you can create depth by, you know, in a couple of ways, by going farther across or having the skis pointed out before coming back to the gate. And it'll probably depend on the radius of the turn and the slope. This is self-explanatory. Elevation is the distance above the gate. Depth is the distance across, and that creates your shape. Johnny had a good point here. I mean, there always is an optimal line, but being able to ski that line will depend on the strength and skill of the racer, and then of course need to be adapted for surface and some other things. You know, this I just thought was good. Johnny, you know, he just talked here about how, you know, very common for younger racers to play it safe and take a high line, but if they do that, if it's too high, and they stepped on the ski up here, they would have all this room, and that room would bring them back on top of the gate, or they'd start high, roll on, need to wait, and double turn. You may have seen that. So, and similarly, if they come off the ski too early, they release the ski, they'll travel either to the gate or inside. So they need to stay with the ski and travel across the hill and create their room. A tough line. Yeah, I mean, the correct line. And you know, and learning this for kids, it takes time, you know, so it's an education. I find it helps to really exaggerate the teaching of where the rise line is, and even take them and show them, like, this is where you start your turn. I need you to have a strong platform here, you know, or here, or whatever the case may be, depending on the slope, because typically they will want to rush it, not stay with the ski or move forward into the new turn. This was in the past presentation. So, I mean, there are a lot of similarities with auto racing and ski racing. So mainly in this one, you know, without getting into too much detail on this, as time is getting on, there's some different ways that cars, obviously, and skiers manage forces, but the goal is to maximize line and manage forces to carry as much speed as possible. And where, to me, it really gets interesting is, coming into the turn, the car they have to brake, but they will choose their line and turn the wheel, maximize their line. Exiting, they will straighten the wheel out as they step on the gas to accelerate. So what the ski racing equivalent of that would be was, they need their platform and they need leverage to maximize the line. And then exiting the turn, they need to step push as hard as they can, driving all the way out of the turn while they flatten the ski out. And again, what a lot of kids do is they punch the apex here. They drop a lot of pressure in one place, right here, and tend to let the skis go loose. So either, they're going to have line problems, or at the very least, they are not maximizing speed. You need to keep pressure on the ski, step on the gas pedal all the way out of the turn. And the best skiers will be able to keep this acceleration going as far as possible, while the ski flattens out. Commitment. Obviously, you can ski well all you want, but unless the racers give it the beans, the equipment doesn't really work. And moving forward, coming across the hill, traveling at a high speed to move your body forward over the outside ski, it requires courage. So courage, commitment, I think those are important things to talk to the kids about. And obviously those things will develop with competency and skill and volume, but at a certain point, they need to try new things and to push themselves. Oh my. Sorry. I just thought I'd throw this in. The coach said this. I asked a World Cup coach when I was a provincial team coach, I was doing an interface, what they were working on. And this is what he said. And at that time, one of the goals of the team, this is when Eric was young, the time that I heard this, one of the goals of the speed team was to have every speed skier in the top 100 in the world in GS. And they had, at that time, actually 3 GS skiers in the top 15 on the speed team. So this is, you can tell exactly where I stopped having help with my presentation because I don't think there are any more pictures. So this is some performance and finish rate data. And in the next presentation, we're going to talk more about data and why it's important. But this, basically what we looked at is men and women, this is men, 2001, 2, and 3 years, slalom and GS, and we took 7 nations and Ontario, and we looked at finish rates. We took the top 3 in each discipline. And you can see this is our average finish rate, and this is the average international across 7 nations. The other nations are Norway, Switzerland, Italy, and France. And this seems to be Switzerland, Italy, and France were somewhere around here, 77, 79%. We also looked at their world rank by age and the number of starts. So, in a general data sense, what this is missing is other disciplines. So when we look at the number of starts, we're not looking at how many starts do they have in other disciplines. We can start to look at by age, what is a 2003 doing? Some nations get into downhill right away consistently, some not so much. Other things you can unpack by looking at this data. Norway, their average world rank by age was 7, across these 3 years, whereas Canada is 40. And Switzerland and France were slower developing too. They were like 30, 32, whereas, Americans tend to be quite competitive. Austria, 13. So there's a lot of interesting stuff here. But the main thing I wanted to look at is what does our finish rate look like, and talk a little bit about why that might be. So the women were a little bit better, 63%. And I know from Duncan and I working on this that finish rates at U16 are improving, which is encouraging. And, our strongest finish rates were actually among the the 2003s. But, clearly our finish rates are not as good. And so, why would that be? And what gets a lot of play when discussing this is confidence and needing to be more comfortable under pressure. And there's for sure something to that. But I think the first place to look is at the basics. And I think extremely likely that racers, if their technique and their tactics are half baked, they don't quite have a strong position. They get into a race, they're a little nervous, the speeds are higher and there's terrain, there's a lot of room for it to go wrong. So I think, to improve finish rates, I think the first thing we need to do is improve the technical foundation and tactical understanding. And then also important to realize that, well, I'm sure everyone does, but in ski racing, unlike other sports, it's not just the competition that gets tougher. So level by level, the speeds increase, the difficulty increases, the skis get stiffer and longer. And so what's good enough today will not be good enough tomorrow. So we really need to build that technical foundation, that tactical understanding. The skills need to be hardwired. And competency builds confidence. I think it's true that the confidence to really attack and make it down the hill comes with confidence, but it's true the reverse too. Like the more skilled they are, I think that they will feel that they can do it, and they can. And the other thing that is important to look at, and this will come up again when we talk about data in the next presentation, is what are they doing in training? Are they finishing? Are they finishing consistently? Are they finishing with, if there's timing on with fast runs? If they are, then, maybe it is more of a mental thing, but it's definitely a training and performance habit. Often in Ontario and even in Canada, I was surprised coming from the high levels back to the lower levels, just seeing kids make a little mistake and stop or ski out. It makes me crazy. Talking to them about it, that those are habits, those recovery skills, those split-second decisions, those things get hardwired. And if the instinct is to not finish or even to recover slowly, like to take their time getting back online, those will be ingrained habits. So the habit of training needs to be that they have to finish, and they have to recover fast. That's 100% what needs to happen. There are World Cup racers that finish a little less, maybe, but the ones that are winners they finish a lot. There's a high level of consistency. And I really like this. I got this from Matt Jordan. Mental toughness is the ability to perform on demand under pressure while fatigued. So I think there's a lot more that goes into the ability to do this than the mental side. There's some physical components, but this is what we will be looking for in our performance athletes, that we develop over time in them. The ability to perform on demand, under pressure, even while fatigued. Johnny, we also know that Jeff is big on drills and technique. There's tons of good video on YouTube of Michaela doing drills, and she talks about it herself quite a bit. One of the things that we would like to do is establish a clear repertoire of drills so that athletes are proficient in some pretty well identified drills by the time they reach FIS or even into U16. It's really important that the execution is correct, that needs to be focused and deliberate. And I think we as coaches can stay on top of this. I'd see it time and time again. We teach the drill, the athlete actually gets it really, really good. And then we don't do it for a little while, and we see them warming up on race day off on a different hill. We're going up the chair, and it looks like something completely different. So, developing that discipline to do it correctly and also deliberately. Athletes, when they're doing drills, they often, to me, look like they're afraid of doing it wrong. Or they're afraid of breaking something because they're really timid, and it's not really that. They can really put a lot into it and be deliberate about what they're doing. Just because the speed is slow doesn't mean the focus and the energy are slow. And then, actually, this was Cam Stevens' suggestion, Ontario ski team coach, creating a matrix based on just basically different functions. And I think we'd like to do that. And we can relate them back to, what their purpose is, but compartmentalize them. And there's also, different difficulty. So say a hopping one, Spice, well, we could start simpler than Spice, but let's get to Spice, which is sort of intermediate. Hopping from foot to foot, the timing with the pole is more difficult. Hopping foot to foot through a picket fence, with gates a meter apart, that's advanced, still doable for, even junior athletes. Or, there's this, I saw these Swiss kids doing, I'm going to call them Broncos, where they start on the tip with the tip engaged. They rock to the heel while maintaining a strong position. Skis leave the ground, the tips go back and touch, the ski bends and they take off the tail. Clearly just a variation, but to practice working the ski while maintaining a strong position. But we do want to create a clear metrics so that when athletes come to FIS or even to the Ontario ski team, they have a quiver of skills that they can use to practice. This is, Johnny mentioned this drill. This is a steering exercise. Hopefully my internet works. So this drill, he referred to as steering versus sliding drill because the ski is being rolled on edge versus keeping the ski flat and pushing the heel out. The ski is going like that, almost like you're pulling with your toes. This, I remember Eric Gay from the time I think he was probably 12 or 13 when I first came across him. But he did this drill from the time he was a kid working with his dad to the time, he retired. His whole career. He would start his warm-ups or in the summer, and he would even do it with GS, Super G skis, whatever. And, basically you get the whole technical package. This is just one, but, platform and outside pressure, ankle engagement, the skis releasing, body facing down the hill, timing with the pole, extension, weight transfer, an example of how, even though it's a slower drill, there's flow, there's rhythm, there's timing. There's a lot in this stuff. You can see basically he's neutral, stacked, transferring the weight to his new ski. You can pick up any manner of different things to focus on with the kids in a simple exercise like this. Okay, so here are some strategies that we'd like to see. One is alignment and cooperation, and I think we can unpack that a little more with what that means for the pathway. But we want to build technically strong skiers. We know about some of our limitations, and we can discuss a SWOT analysis later. But one of the things we can for sure do is make sure that all of our athletes are extremely technically proficient. We can ski a high volume, high focus with a high focus. Jeff mentioned that, they travel around Europe, at least with technical teams, and the places they look for to train have, they look for a fast turnaround, hard snow, and terrain, and for Collingwood, ding, ding, and ding. We can do that. And we can ski a lot of volume, increasing the focus. That's something to work on. We can focus on long-term development versus short-term performance. That can be tough, when there's a race coming up and there's pressure on. But, Johnny mentioned training Super G and GS the week of the Kitzbühel slalom, for his slalom skiers, because that's the opportunity they had. Those are 19-year-old guys. So let's, backpedal that to 15-year-olds or 14-year-olds. Surely we can keep it going as well. And I just put these acquisition and realization in here because like a good yearly training plan or a YTP, at least the way with the team we broke it down, was acquisition, realization, recovery, and tapers. So acquisition is basically all your training, your learning. Realization is competition. Taper speaks for itself. And really, at the development team level, at least, we were 90% focused on acquisition and pushing volume, like ski, 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 with small tapers. We had a couple of, we'd have a couple of tapers, like for the World Juniors, or similar, where we try to back it off. But for the most part, even at that level, like 19, 20 years old, you're really trying to push the volume and experience to build for later years. And Jeff mentioned that, Hirscher stopped skiing in the summer. As of when did I last coach World Cup? 2012 or 13, he was still skiing a huge volume. But, in later years, he had skied so much that he could take a little time off. But in younger years, he skied a ton. Ski literacy, we want educated, self-reliant, resilient athletes. So we need to develop their understanding. And I look at ski literacy exactly the same way we discuss physical literacy. So, there are a lot of things that go into physical literacy, and the same thing with skiing. So we know that early specialization in sport is not actually the way to high performance. And it's the same thing with racing. They need a broad range of experience. I would remiss if I didn't mention this. If we want to push the volume, here's the kicker. Piling volume on poor technique increases injury risk. Wear and tear, and basically the possibility of mistakes and injury. It increases it. So we want durability, or durable athletes, which means they need to be super well physically prepared, as technically efficient as possible, and educated about line and opportunity versus risk decisions. This in this context, if they rotate their hip in the turn and drop their hip inside while the ski loads, they'll put tension on their ACL, and they'll end up loading in the apex and without a way of releasing the ski. So it is super important. And ski racing it's a sport with load, with physical load, much like lifting weight or whatever. And we know that lifting weight and increasing weight and force without proper technique is dangerous. And it's the same thing with racing. So if we want to pump the volume, we need, for young kids, those really, really sound fundamentals and balance. And then the other thing is training variation. So again, with a training plan, you can, at least this is the way we looked at it, and you can create a graph for this in your plan. Volume, intensity, and difficulty, and then high, moderate, or low. For the most part, if you push all three of these things, high, volume, intensity, and difficulty, you're asking for it. We know that, I can't remember where I read this, but the Norwegians talked about a conditioning program that would allow them to ski as many runs as possible in rough conditions, in difficult courses, at high intensity for 12 days straight in the summer. So maybe elite athletes can do that, but for the most part, you need to vary these things. And as long as you do, you should be able to safely keep the volume really high, with minimizing risk. And also, there's also a mental aspect to this. If you do all of these things with high, in sort of high category, they tend to burn out, obviously. So these things need to be varied in the training plan. And some of the things for the next discussion we'll have, I'm not sure if that'll be in the fall or when, but we're going to discuss just broader strategy. And these are really important things. So it's not like it's less important. Some of the things that'll come up are just the vision and goals, conditioning, super important. We have some strategies, and there are strategies in the works that are actually implementing right now with U16 and up. Talk about benchmarks, key performance indicators, SMART goals. we really need everyone's help in doing a better job of tracking data so we know what we're doing. And we will very likely talk a little bit more ski-specific strategy. And that's it. Any questions? So I rifled through that pretty fast.
Kip, since I'm a co-host on this, I'll go ahead and ask a question. And I think the questions for the other coaches can be typed in. But one of the things that I liked from your slide when you talked about the courage and commitment to the athlete and their approach to it in their turns or their runs. How do you, in your experiences, how do you approach getting an athlete to that point? Do you look at using repetition, or do you look at implementing like more game like situations? Like what's your best advice on that one?
Well, a little bit of both, but I kids are easily inspired. So talking, just, I think keeping environments positive and energized, and talking to them about trying. Like I often talk to kids in terms of commitment. Like a good example that they often relate to is, what do you do when you do a backflip into a pool, for example? It's often the kids get to a certain point where they can do it, but they don't commit. And kids, what's the most important thing? Doing a 360 or a backflip into a pool. Like it's not how do you do it? It's you need to commit. And talking to kids in those ways, or just inspiring them to push a little more. Now, obviously, if they're afraid because they can't do it, you might have to back off and work on those supporting skills. But oftentimes they need to try.
Yeah. Like it.
Yep, couple questions rolling in now. One is, at the younger levels, younger than the provincial teams, what data collection or data markers would you recommend?
Younger levels, well, I think a good place to start, and we can share this, is how many days do they ski, how many runs, percentage of focus by discipline. Oh, there's a echo. I'm not sure why. So yeah, number of days they ski, the number of runs they ski, and percentage of focus by discipline. So, including free ski and play. So how much they're doing of what. And it becomes important because, for example, the LTAD, even for, I think, U16s is up to 45% free ski and technical work. So you need to understand and plan for that. And it's good to reflect. Also train to race ratios. How many days do they train per race? I think that's probably enough.
All right. Another question that came in was in regards to the commitment. How important do you find it to create an environment where they're friends among the athletes? And what does that lead to?
It's sure nicer. There are definitely times when that doesn't happen. And the main thing, I think, is that athletes need to understand regardless of how they feel, they need to respect each other. And be, somewhat professional, and, all kids need the right to enjoy their day, and the experience. So that's the groundwork. There are probably team building exercises and ways of getting them to encourage and support each other. I think it's okay to talk to them about it, where World Cup teams support and encourage and cheer each other on and share ideas, in highly competitive environments. Kids can learn from that. And even if you want to win, it's okay to be friends. I also think if you create that base level of understanding and mutual respect, they're kids, and the friendships often grow. On occasion, it gets ugly, and that's tough. But for the most part, kids gravitate toward those sorts of things anyway.
Another question just coming in. Someone's wondering about the importance of free skiing on slalom skis in order to kind of create that proper motor patterns versus a lot of kids like to free ski out on twin tips and things like that. And do you think that that has adverse effects on technical development?
I mean, I think to learn specific things, skiing, for sure, skiing on slalom skis will give you, it's a microcosm of all of the turns. So GS, Super G, everything. So super important. I also wonder, again, we talked about load and repetition and the need for diversity at younger ages. I think doing a high volume of high load skiing on slalom skis too early, or in gates, could maybe contribute. I've been wondering. We've had a lot of kids, specifically guys, with patellar tendonitis, and there could be a variety of reasons for that. But given that there are different ways to acquire all those skills, I personally don't have anything against kids going out on twin tips, and hitting the terrain park. I think that's cool. At a certain point, if you want to be good at ski racing, you probably need to bear down a little more, but particularly when they're younger, I think that's okay. And if the choice is, I'm going to go home or I'm going to go hit the terrain park with my twin tips, I would say grab those twin tips.
Do you think in Ontario that we have a winning culture, or should we? There's always things that we should celebrate in all finishes, but is the importance on winning?
Well, I don't think that, I think we need to set our goals with performance and then decide what we're going to do. And I think I left this out of the presentation, but I think we could have a winning culture. I think we're not taking the right steps. And I think we don't have the cohesion among the groups. I think we have the people, we have, they look at the people that participate in skiing. We're talking about high functioning people that do very well at stuff, like whatever they decide to do. So why in skiing are we not delivering? And I think there can be specific strategies. I'm reminded of Amanda Visick's fun maps and the research she did, which said that the number one determining factor of people participating or continuing to participate in a sport is fun. And that's athletes of both genders, all levels, amateur, professional. It's fun. And what does fun mean? And they broke that down, which was interesting, which is trying hard. Factor number one, learning and improving. Factor number two, positive coaching. And I lose track of the next ones. And my own personal philosophy is, if I understand, most parents don't get their kids into sport to become a world champion. But if the goal is to give them a life experience, I find that the kids end up going on some trips. They might have fun, but if we put them in real athletic programs, most of them, they will get a great life experience if they really try. And I don't think that most kids quit because they're burnt, maybe, but I think they quit because they don't feel like they're getting anywhere. They don't feel like they're learning and improving. And we looked at those finish rates. I think anyone doesn't finish a race, they're frustrated, and if I see a finish rate of 81% versus 50%, I see somebody that's probably 30% happier or has had 30% happier days. And, kids, I think when push comes to shove, they tend to leave the sport, not because when those other pressures in life come up and they look at where is their value, if they're not learning, progressing, and really getting something out of ski racing, they choose something else. And so I think focusing on not winning, but the steps necessary to win in excellence will give kids better experiences and hopefully give us a world champion one day.
Got time for a couple more. So with the short Ontario season, thinking specifically under the FIS age group, how much time should be spent free skiing training versus in-gate training?
Well, that I don't have in front of me, and it's broken out by, in the LTAD anyway, it's broken out by age. And when we were doing that, like that LTAD was done with a lot of outreach. We talked about Ontario. It's hard to keep kids engaged to just free ski. We don't have big mountains. So I think there are other ways of creating adaptive environments if free skiing is not as much of an option, or it's hard to engage the kids. But free skiing is a big part of it. It's hard. It's hard to acquire skills under pressure in the courses. They need to acquire them in free skiing. But there are metrics in the LTAD, and we can either, if you don't have access to those links, we can provide them. A lot of free skiing though, tons.
And one last question I've got right now is, do you have any suggestions on how race days can be improved, specifically at U14 and below?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know what specific issues you're referring to. Something that comes to mind with that, though, and this is a Tim Geffellerism, another Canadian Ottawa coach working with the Norwegian World Cup women. He was talking to Jacques about, what you can accomplish on a race day, especially at the younger ages. The concept of the hay being in the barn, I think we can throw that in the bin. Kids can learn. Kids could be coached. We can talk to them between runs, before runs. Giving them room to warm up if they're, and space to ski a little bit on their own is important. But like we talked about in the acquisition versus realization, they can get a lot out of a race day. Whether they're having a good day or a bad day, they should be out there learning, improving, and probably doing some free skiing after. Might be a good start.
All right. Well, that's all the questions that we have. So Kip, thank you for your time and your presentation. Everybody else, thank you for joining us again in the third week of this. And just a reminder that registration for next week, Wednesday, June 3rd, Jim Taylor will be speaking on essential mental training. The registration is now open on the AOA website. So please go ahead and sign up for that. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.